down now.
Robert.
Whoa.
5:46 p.m. and welcome you all to the April 16th S&A meeting. We'll start with roll call and attendance. John Bowen. Here. Joseph Bryant.
Here.
JD Charest.
Alive and well.
Sarah Feeney.
Here.
Miles Glover.
Here.
Sharon Jonasson.
Here.
Kate Kennison.
Here.
Robert Lane.
Here.
Robert Mosier.
Present.
Josh Mutart.
Here.
Catherine O'Neill. Todd Shiver.
Here.
Ashley Stubb.
Here.
Derek Whitman.
Here.
Someone go down
And
over
alive and well.
Connie Williams.
Here.
And Jacob Whitman, I am present. All right, we'll move to approval of the agenda. I'd like to entertain a motion to move public, oh, there's public comment before, look. Oh, communications, yeah. Communications to after chairs report. So it'll be before public comment.
So moved.
Is there a second? Josh, second. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, motion passes. 1 second. All right, I'd like to move to section 4, approval of the minutes from April 9th, 2014. Could look over those for a minute. All right, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes from April 9th, 2014.
So.
Is there a second? Any discussion? All in favor of approval of the minutes? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Minutes approved. We're on to section 5, reports. Not much to report this week. I did go to the Budget and Finance Committee meeting yesterday, and supplemental funding requests for PESH, the 80 students going to Wenatchee, was approved, and also for, what was the second one?
I can look. No, nurse.
It was for, yeah, I can't remember what the second one was that was approved. That was 24 hours ago, so. Huh? Oh, the meals for ROTC meals, yes.
Oh, right.
So, thank you, Kate.
On top of it, Kate.
For that
So
thing
those
you're
two
not
were
gonna
approved by Budget and Finance Committee.
Yeah, we didn't.
And other than that, I have nothing to report.
What?
Do you have anything, Sharon?
Water money back.
Do you have anything?
How bad?
My only report is I'm glad that Sharon's happy.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
All right. We'll move to communications received. Do you want to read the communications?
Yes.
Jordan?
So the communication we received, and we moved it because it's relevant to the voting today, and I'll just go ahead and read it. It's from the Associated Students of CWU Board of Directors. To whom it may concern, this is dated yesterday, April 15th. At the Associated Students of Central Washington University's Board of Directors public meeting on April 14th, 2014, the board discussed the Learning Commons and its funding request for the S&A committee. Collectively, we recognize that this is not an ideal way to pay for an academic support program such as tutoring that students across campus rely upon, but it is necessary given the financial situation of the university. Under better circumstances, we would prefer that these tutoring services were paid for out of tuition revenue, as we believe they are a core academic function of the university. However, given the cuts Learning Commons would experience if they do not secure funding for the 2014-2015 school year, and the important service that the Learning Commons provides for students at Central, the board feels that it is crucial to fully support this program. In that regards, we formally state our support for the full funding of the Learning Commons S&A request for the 2014-2015 academic year. Thank you for your time and your consideration of our position. Sincerely, Brian Elliott, ASCW BOD President.
All right, thank you, Joey. All right, move on to section 7, or section 6, public comment. Is there any public comment at this time? All right, seeing none, we'll move to section 7, new business. Seeing that there's no new business, we'll move on to section 8, old business. Subsection A, number I, or number 1, I guess, 1418 Learning Commons Tutoring Services is requesting $90,125. I'd like to open up the table for discussion for 10 minutes, and if we need any more, we'll evaluate at that time. So, table's open. JD.
I'd like to ask Sharon, is this possible for us to even fund throughout the quadrennium? And if so, how is it going to affect the S&A budget in years to come?
Well, I did receive some email requests to come prepared, so I have brought the same document that we started at the beginning of the year when we looked at what our budget was that was projecting into next year. So I thought the best way would be just to walk through that so that you guys could make your own decisions based off of that. And I apologize because a lot of times these do not sort well through. So to keep it at a decent size where you guys can read it and not have it too.
Can you guys all see it?
So I'm gonna walk through where we are this year, and I'm gonna have to expand a couple columns temporarily, and then I'll walk through how this carries forward and affects next year. So at the beginning of the year, I was estimating that our fall, winter, spring revenue was going to be $6 million. Our summer revenue, $345,000. We received fees from the AUAP program that are prorated based off of the time that those students are here. Interest income is not likely, but I had put a placeholder in it, so I'm not counting on that. So I was looking at, hoping that we would bring in $6,365,000. I did pull our numbers for fall, winter, and spring, and most of spring has posted. Now I'm $148,000 short. And I did go look to see where did I go so wrong. I had originally budgeted for 9% in tuition waivers because that's pretty standard. We actually received 10.9% in tuition waivers, which took our projected revenue down by an additional approximately $120,000. So I was still off some, but that kind of made a difference on this year's revenue. So I'm just going to walk through this sheet again as a refresher because it's been a long time since we looked at it. So we look at what is it we believe is new revenue coming in, so that's this number. And then I take this number and I separate it because we have what is already contractually obligated to items such as our bond and our debt policy reserves. If we had any other legal binding documents, I would also reduce that. So that's what this column is over here. Those are kind of like the non-negotiables. We are not allowed to touch that. So after I take that out, that leaves us of this year's revenue, the $5,200,000 and change. This year we had a couple one-time things happen that do not typically occur. And the first, which would be doubtful that it would ever occur again because we are in step and agreement with the university, would be the administrative fee. There was a lot of back and forth and negotiating and coming to a common understanding of what the correct calculation should be and how that fee is calculated. It wasn't that it shouldn't have been calculated, it was how do we calculate it appropriately. So we received money back from the first 2 years of paying that based off of a different calculated figure. And then we also received approximately $500,000 back from our base funding. So when it was the end of a quadrennium cycle, there were a couple key things that happened that raised that up. My position had been vacant for about 1.5 years. That's when Ed Day had been in my position. We had also been funding what they called a flex account that was $40,000 a year. So it had accumulated approximately $160,000 because there were some funding practices that needed to be ended because they were not in accordance with university policy. And then we had a couple other large vacancies in some of our S&A programs. So we had quite a unique pullback this year. But that brought us this number for the committee to look at. And we, so that brought us $6,822,000 to deal with for this year. And the committee understood when they were doing the base funding last year, they were really trying to not increase the S&A fee at that time because they didn't know how the legislature would vote. So they knew that they could potentially be looking at a freeze in the S&A fee. So when they were taking that into account when they came up with the base funding number, and based off of the other fees associated with our umbrella of service and activity fees and stuff, we knew on a one-year basis we would be okay. So this is the base funding less the bond amount that we're currently funding for our S&A programs. This year, this committee voted to increase base funding for mandatory pay increases, the one-time classified staff, and then we also have minimum wage increases. So that brings us with 5.4 million then and change that we had available. I'm sorry, excuse me. That was a total of 5.4 million. Left us 1.3 million. We decided we would set 275 aside for supplemental funding. The good news is, even though we're 140 short in revenue, I don't see us, we'll probably have about that much left over in our supplemental budget. So I believe it's going to be about a wash. So I have not adjusted this number because I do believe we're going to have that much left over in supplemental funding. But you need to be aware of it. So at the time we said 275, great, we're going to carry forward $1,075,000, and that was kind of like that catch-all. What happens if the unbelievable could happen and the legislature froze tuition again? And that's what happened. So that's how we're funding next year. So I'm moving over to next year. So I have dropped the 100,000 here. So we're looking at 6.2 million and change. Here's the $1,075,000 carried forward. So that left us 6 million to deal with. And again, here's the base funding. Here's what we already approved that's enduring, those numbers. Here's what's being requested this night, roughly 95,000. And then we have a very high probability, because it's being budgeted for, some mandatory pay increases that we may be asked to look at next year. So I put them in just so we have a full, complete picture of what we're dealing with. I dropped for next year supplemental funding to 175 because I think that that's still a very fair number given how we restructured base funding, and it doesn't look like we're going to use it, and we are looking at the, oh my gosh, look what happened. Tuition was frozen 2 years in a row, and if it happens a third year, we are really in dire circumstances, and you'll see why in a second. So if you look at this, we came into the year with $1,075,000. We're ending the year with $366,000. That's roughly a $700,000 drop in our fund balance. That's an enduring drop in our $700,000, of that $700,000, depending on what we approve from here going out. So that's roughly an 11% increase needed to fill that gap. Next spring, when the committees, for all of you who may be sitting on this committee next year, this will be the discussion we're having, is what do we do about this gap? Now, there is an RCW out there that says we cannot increase tuition at any greater percentage, or we cannot increase the S&A fee at any greater percentage than what tuition is increased at. So if the legislature caps tuition at any amount under 11%, we are looking at having to relay those cuts to our current funded base programs. So that is one thing that people need to be aware of. So the more we spend now, or the more we improve, we agree to do enduring, has pretty good significant impacts next year that we're going to be discussing. The other thing that we also need to just be aware of, and is the bond, which we've all talked about. There's a lot of different legal requirements in the management of the bond. Now, we do have some flex and cushion, which I had planned for this year and into next year. I don't really have a plan going. Well, I do have a plan, but what it says is you cannot spend more than you're taking in. That's a really simplified version of it. There's some exclusions that don't count towards what you're spending. For example, capital improvements. If we had the roof blowout and we had to dip into our reserves and spend $2 million on the roof, that would not count towards that expense number that cannot exceed our revenue. So there are some exclusions, things like depreciation and stuff, and I don't want to get into a whole lot of detail, but it is something that the fund managers, myself and Pat Stanton, we're always looking at. So within our area, are we following that rule? With S&A, there's an umbrella within S&A. So I had some wiggle room this year to cover it because the sub and the rec are also underneath that S&A umbrella. And I have that next year, although one of those entities has significantly increased their planning for operating expenses, which is going to reduce my buffer there of what they can cover to make sure we're not spending more than what we're earning. So for me to say, yeah, we don't have to worry about would be irresponsible of me.
Is that it?
Yes.
Okay. I would like to entertain a motion to extend discussion until voting. I entertain.
I'll make the motion.
Okay, is there a second? I'll second. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, motion passes. We will discuss until a committee member decides to vote and it's approved. So we might be here all night, but the Mariners started 8 minutes ago. So.
Well, they started earlier than that. They started at 5.
Oh. All right. Any discussion?
I mean, not
Derek.
Yeah, I have a question on this. Can we go back to the first part?
The first year?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the question I had was, so basically the reason why we had a shortfall this year from what we expected as far as revenue is concerned is because the school gave free tuition to more people than you expected.
Well,
And that would cover the S&A fee that they're not paying.
when there's a tuition waiver applied, it does cover specific mandatory fees, and the S&A fee is a component of tuition. So tuition waivers are applied to the S&A fee.
So basically, we expected that 9% of our revenue would be taken away.
Right, and that's the typical amount that we usually see. It is strategic, and it is not meant as, it's not a bad decision to increase tuition waivers, because the theory behind it is when it helps increase headcount, even though they may pay a reduced tuition the first year, they're also paying for housing, they're also paying for dining, they're also, it's an incentive to get them here, and the probability that they'll stay continuing years. So it is a good business practice, and it, as a whole for the university, it does help with, headcount and the sustainability of the tuition of the institution as a whole.
I wanted to just clarify something, first of all, thank you for bringing this, Sharon. It's really helpful. But this is an estimate. I wanted everybody to really understand that this is an estimate, and there's a lot of things that can impact this. Sharon built several estimates, so this is a very good projection of where we might be and how much of the reserve we will have to eat into if this stays the same. But the point that I want to make is one of the things that Learning Commons is doing is acting toward and assisting with retention. And one of the ways that we want to generate more revenue and bring more students in and keep them is through retention. And that's not just about money, it's about the students being able to complete their education, because many of them do need tuition. So I wanted to just say that there are possible alternatives. The request is to increase base budget for 3 years. There's an alternative to change that or request that to be changed to a supplemental request, which would fund it for 1 year. Thereby, the S&A committee would not tie themselves into 3 years. The other alternative, and that might allow some additional research into whether or not it's possible that students who use that could possibly pay for usage, which is something we had discussed in the last meeting. So there's other options other than just going with funding the base budget that would be somewhat of a positive outcome for both, if you will.
Any further discussion? Ashley?
I believe it is the job of this committee to responsibly look forward at all times. And part of that is looking out for the academic success of the students on our campus. With that said, I think that this is an issue that, this is a core academic necessity, but I'm not sure if these funds are appropriate for it, considering the financial state that we're in now and the financial state that is likely to continue in the future. Given the past legislative session and the freeze on tuition, I think it's highly likely the legislature will continue that trend. And considering Governor Inslee stated the state address this year, he has projections to lobby the legislature, so to speak, to increase minimum wage over the next few years. And you saw what it was like when they came in when we approved funds earlier this year for the mandatory pay increase. If that continues to happen, that'll be a continued burden on our budget. So with that said, I will not be voting in favor of this increase at this time.
Derek?
So I would like to sort of address what Connie said, that this is good for retention. I believe that it is good for retention. I think it's a great thing, because I think we would lose a lot of students that otherwise would be here because of the Learning Commons. That being said, that really hurts the administration, and they should make it a priority. It shouldn't be S&A funded, period.
Any further discussion? John?
I guess I'm just surprised by some of the numbers that you shared with us, Sharon. What the spreadsheet shows is that in each year we have committed more in base funding than we've committed more in base funding than the revenue available for each year.
And we made that conscious decision last year.
Okay, I just don't recall us committing to spend more each year than we would have available. Or maybe I'm just remembering incorrect.
But remember also in the beginning, Sharon was projecting revenue coming in, John. So I think that there was a slight decrease in the revenue that she was projecting coming in. And we agreed to, because typically also our supplemental is underspent. So I think, I recall that
we were basing it on 11%
Yeah.
tuition increase, right? And then possibly another.
I think we
11%.
were basing a lot of our projections on assumptions that did not turn out to be true. Tuition increase plus a greater percentage.
Well, and part of the plan was to, because we knew that we were going to be getting something back on the administrative fee, and we knew we were going to get back on the quadrennium pullback. When we talked about keeping the funds low, we knew last year we had like a $1.3 million carry forward or something like that. I can pull it up. And so based off of that, we knew we could not ask for an S&A fee increase because we had the reserves to cover the first year or two of the quadrennium cycle.
Right, I remember that now.
Yeah, so that's right.
Joey and John.
No, I just want to make a point of order that while the current state of the budget is important and relevant to the conversation, and I think it's good for us to have this conversation, the discussion right now is about the funding request. So while we can talk about where we are, the conversations of how we got to where we are aren't necessarily in order with the discussion right now. So just as a reminder for the committee.
But the future state is. Okay. John?
How do you?
JD and Tom.
So, how much supplemental funding have we out of that 275,000? Are we at about 100,000?
I approximately that.
So we've get, we have
so
100
we have,
79,000, is that what I see?
that's what is currently approved. So we have roughly 175 left. So I'm projecting, when I said I believe that shortfall, I don't see us allocating more than 70 to 100,000. I'd be surprised if we allocated more than that. So I'm looking at 100,000 of what's in our supplemental budget coming back to cover that shortfall in our, based off of the tuition waivers.
Okay, so then I guess my follow-up question then is, in your projected, next year's projected budget, where it says, under projected expenses, and it says mandatory pay increases, I believe I understood that 95,000 was a projection to say if we were to fund this. Is
Correct.
that is my,
You are
okay.
correct.
Okay. So then I'm not gonna make a motion, but my thought is this: if we were to give them funding in any way, give them supplemental funding of close to or around that 1 year, and ask that, obviously we can't tell them what to do, but say like, there's another way to fund this. Coming into this meeting, this is my own personal opinion. Coming into this meeting, I had a very strong opinion that this was something that needed to be supported fully 100% by this committee based on the importance of it. And looking at the fact that the numbers could impact more programs, and where we're already making a lot of cuts, concerns me a lot. But I don't want to see this program be turned away or not given any money, because it is a very valid program. So my suggestion is possibly a supplemental funding, turning it base funding into a supplemental funding to keep within our budget, to hopefully around the same carry forward, so we're not affecting our budget as much, and that way we're not turning away a great program.
Todd and then Connie.
I kind of agree with JD, and I'm intrigued by Connie's, what Connie said about the supplemental. That's a 1 year commitment versus a 3 year commitment. I feel better about that because we can reassess where we are next year and know for sure if we are going to get a tuition increase or not this time next year. In this question, so my question is a weird question. It's going to be for you. Most of my questions are weird, so.
He's like pointing.
The artist, not you, Miles. The artist in me does come out every now and then. So last year, John and I, and Connie and others listened to a lot of base requests. And so much so that when I gave my base request, I kind of made fun of it a little bit, because you're in a predicament. What do you ask for when you ask for a base request? Do you ask for Disney World?
Right.
Or do you ask for bare bones? Or do you ask for what do you need? What do you want to get? Inevitably, everybody asks for Disney World.
Right.
And so, we would get these $300,000 requests. They would get $50,000 funding. They seem to be pretty happy with that, and I didn't see a lot of cutbacks this year because they didn't get their $300,000.
Right.
So, I guess I'm asking $90,000. Is that Disney World? Is that bare bones? Or is that exactly what you need? Because I think we would entertain a lesser amount. So I think it's an honest question.
It's somewhere between Disney World and exactly what we need. We could run the program for less, certainly. Particularly if we took strain off of the developmental student money, because then we could reallocate some of that to support tutoring services specifically for those students, which would mean that the money we were contributing wouldn't be going to support developmental students. So we could cut it back to probably, quick math in my head, around 60 to 65, and still run the program and support everybody. So it would be possible to cut it back.
I mean, it's an honest question with an honest answer. So
If I may ask, what was the original request for base funding?
95.
95.
Okay. At the beginning of the year?
Oh.
90,125.
Yeah.
No, the original request at the beginning of the year, or the quadrennium base funding, what was?
Oh. And your original request?
Your original base
Your
request.
Disney
Oh,
World
that was
request.
Our original base request last year was Westside specific, and I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
remember what we asked for. I think we got about half of what we asked for. I think it was
You asked for around
80,000.
90 to 100?
Yeah, it
Okay.
was- Yeah.
Okay. Derek, did you ask?
Yeah, I was kind of going to ask a question on that, because you said that you're asking for, and this is to Prairie also.
If I could just remind the board really quickly, try to keep your questions to the gallery to a minimum. We've had 2 weeks of questions, and this is a discussion time now.
Okay.
But
I'll
if
rephrase
you
it
can,
then.
okay, perfect.
Basically, what I'm thinking is that we heard a request that was supposed to be sort of, this is what we need, and then it was, I think, expanded. Was it? That basically at this point they're going to be into us for what, $135,000?
Some of that is West Side funding.
Right.
Yes.
Ooh, I don't think we could have really afforded any of it. Could we have at this point?
I think we already heard the budget review, and it seems to be pretty bare bones.
Yeah.
70% drop in carry forward is pretty substantial.
So this is actually a question for Sharon. Is there any way of stipulating, for instance, that that the committee would provide up to a certain amount that is matched by the administration? So, for instance, if the administration spends $1, we're willing to spend $1.
Well, there are a lot of jointly funded programs out there, but to put, I don't know as if we can quite manage that tonight at this committee without them here to say, yes, we will commit those funds.
Connie.
I wanted to address two things, and I wanted to address Derek's comment too, but my first question, and I spoke with Sharon earlier, is if we know, I'd like to know what how our sister universities handle their own programs, because I don't know if they're requesting the students to pay or if that's coming from their services and activities. So I really, does anybody?
I did some research
Go
today.
ahead.
So Western is partially funded, not fully by S&A, and Eastern does not seem to be funded by S&A.
And
That's
you
the
don't know
research
whether
I
the
found.
students pay a portion?
No, I didn't find any information.
Okay, and then my second.
I'd like to recognize the gallery. Do you have information on
I
that?
actually I was at a conference today where the president of Eastern spoke, and the budget model that they're using is that they're putting their state dollars towards services that have proven to be successful. So their tutoring services are state funded at Eastern.
Thank you. Connie, go ahead.
That's okay, no problem. So, I will say from what I know, and from the budget meetings that I've overheard today, to your comment as far as administration paying for this, and by administration, I'm assuming you mean state funds.
Yes.
Okay. I think that's gonna be highly unlikely that it would be, and the reason being, they allowed no tuition increase and they cut our budget, and so basically, our budget, we're operating at a bare minimum. So I'm not questioning you. I'm not saying that it should not be that way. But the likelihood of it happening, I think, is pretty slim. So I think that this committee is going to have to make the decision as to whether to fund partially or in total request. And I don't know that the administration would be open to, if you put in $1, we'll put in $1. But I just don't know that that would be something that would be.
Okay, Todd.
So, so along these lines of the administration or the university paying for it, we just got an email from the president saying they're having to dip into their reserves to make it through next year because of no tuition increase. So I think that's where Connie's coming from. They're dipping into their reserves. I also remember sitting on this committee when the battle was going on about the administrative fee last year. It was a pretty big battle because it was a big chunk. And I remember, I really didn't take sides, but I remember seeing the result and seeing that we were getting, how much did we get back, Sharon?
It was 400 for 1 year.
400 1 year.
370
It was like six.
So we got
It was
back
almost
about-
800,000.
So we got back about $800,000, and I just remember my comment to Scott Robinson was, well, somebody's got to come up with that $800,000, and S&A is probably going to pay in that $800,000 through funding that the university can't fund. I mean, this might be an example of that. You know, it's coming back to us anyway. Except it's coming back instead of an administrative tax, it's coming back to us like this. But I just remember making that comment. That money's got to come from somewhere. It's going to come out to get us. So I think that perspective is important too.
Any further discussion? JD?
I really think that I have to remind myself about this. So I don't know if the whole committee is still clear with this understanding. I have to remind myself all the time that this program is not completely on the chopping block. It's the amount of services that they're being able to provide is what's on the chopping block. And I think that giving them the ability to continue another year in a reduction of services is much easier than having them go at a much bigger reduction. So if we say, I'm just going to spit a number out here, if we give them enough money to cut 50% of what they're able to do, it's much easier to do that than to go all the way back down to their base level and start over and try to build their way back up. In addition, it is also it's more money that if they want to ever get back up to that level, it's more work that they have to do in order to get up to that level to find funding from other sources. And so, essentially, I guess what I'm saying is that it's easier to, cut back a little bit than it is to be for the learning commons. It'll be easier for us to cut them. I don't know the right phrasing. Keep it committee kosher. It's easier for us to give them a little bit and then not give them anything for them. Am I clear? I feel like I confused myself.
Is there any further discussion at this time? Derek?
I just want to make one small point. I think that we have the potential of looking at having to make significant cuts to stuff that we already support, and we would have to make even more cuts if we took on something new. So I personally, I think that some of the stuff could afford to be cut just a little bit. Maybe not so much, not so drastically, but I think that we're looking at the potential for drastic cuts, even loss of whole programs. So, over years we've decided, or the previous committees have decided what they want to support, and I think that that's...
I'd like to remind that it's in the key duties of this committee to uphold the financial stability of the programs currently funded. It's stated in our Constitution and bylaws.
Yeah, because we're not just looking at cutting at the end of the next 4 years or whatever. We're talking about cutting money that's already been allocated to them. So basically, they'd lose money that they were expecting.
Any further discussion? JD?
I would like to make a motion to approve the Learning Commons on a supplemental, a request on a supplemental level, if that's a correct phrasing, for the amount of $45,062.50 for this one time. And I can't explain my rationale until discussion, right, Ashley? Okay.
Been a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it for sake of discussion.
Okay.
My rationale behind that was Sharon's projections put next year's an estimated cost of $95,000 that if we were to fund this fully for next year. So essentially, cutting that in half is going to give us some, for lack of a better phrase, wiggle room based on the fact that we may be we'd be losing money from our carry forward, because the carry forward, she said she projected that we'd be carrying forward about 170 or 140,000. So we lose some money out of that carry forward, but we wouldn't. But based on the next year's projections, because we'd be only using half, it wouldn't have the same impact. Does that make sense?
Yes and no.
Does it not? Is that not?
I
Sound
think
like
what you're trying to say, it will be a lesser impact.
a lesser?
And
impact.
even though we're going to drop, instead of 700,000 in reserves, it's more like 655,000 in reserves, which you are going to have to ask for a fee increase. It's just, you will not be having to make.
That's
those
pending
ones.
tuition, because we can't increase more than the rate of tuition. So if legislator decides to not increase tuition, we are gonna see probably a 10% cut to programs currently funded.
Correct.
But that's not point of order, so. Any further discussion? Ashley?
I continue to have concerns about future fiscal impacts, and I also have concerns over using this money for extensively for academic pursuits, which I do believe this is, and I don't believe that is the purpose of these funds.
Any further discussion? Derek?
I'd like to agree with Ashley. I do not think it's the purpose of these funds at all to be put to this use. And I really would just like to see what happens if we give them nothing.
Okay.
They'll come up with money somehow.
All right, any further discussion? Robert?
I agree with Ashley and Derek on this one, and my other concern is if we decide to give any kind of money, my further concern will be, what happens if there's more cuts elsewhere? Do they come back then and ask for more money? Because now we're setting up that we're willing to do this to some extent, but then the question comes in, how far do we go?
Sets a precedent.
Yeah, precedent. And I honestly do not feel these funds should be used for this. For me, it's an academic program, and if you're really worried about retention and stuff, ask for the departments to pay. Ask for reorganize other stuff. But I don't think this money should be used towards something like this.
Connie?
And I respect everybody's opinion, and I actually would agree that I think this is more an academic area. I truly do. I do not, and I think if administration could fund it with state funds, they would, because they consider that important. But unfortunately, we are cutting, we're dipping into our reserves, so it won't happen. And so I go back to revisiting, can we make this somehow a win, and I don't want to say win for both sides, but can we ease the pressure a little bit and compromise, thank you. Knowing that we're not going to be spending all of our supplemental this year, can we not fund, if not fully, the 60 that that Jerry mentioned that they could use some out of what we would have left over anyway this year? That would tie us into multi-year funding, and it would provide time for administration and academia to try to find another route to fund this, if possible. So I think that, that to me might be a better resolution.
Is there any further discussion?
I would like to echo Connie's comments, and in addition, I would simply say that I think there's a fairness concern here. First, that S&A already supports similar services for students on the west side, so there's a fairness issue in supporting students on this side of the Cascade Mountains. And secondly, as was pointed out in Prairie's original presentation, there's a fairness issue in that currently these services are being paid for mainly by developmental course students, and that's not fair and not even being appropriate. So I think that supporting JD's motion is the right thing to do.
Derek?
On what John just said about the developmental course fees paying for this, I think that's equivocated, because am hearing multiple things, like for instance that if we can open up more of those fees, that we could use them for tutoring and student, because I don't know what the
Point of order, are you speaking to the motion?
I'm speaking to the motion. I'm making a comment on what he has to say. So yeah, I don't think that it does in fact do what you're saying at that specific point.
The motion is for $45,000.
$62.50.
50 cents?
And 50
Why
cents.
are you gonna do that to us?
I
46,000.
I just said divide by 2.
Round up. Come on.
45,060.
$2.50.
Okay. And half of a penny. All right, any further discussion at this time? All right, there's been a motion, a second, and seeing no discussion, all in favor of approving $45,062.50 out of our supplemental funding? Any opposed? 1, 2, 3. All right, it's a 5 to 6 vote. Any abstentions? All right, motion denied. Miles?
I would like to make a motion to deny the Learning Commons for their full amount.
So, the best motion to make at this time would be to postpone indefinitely.
Okay, so I would like to make a motion to postpone indefinitely the Learning Commons
Request.
request.
Okay, there's been a motion. Is there a second? Robert, second. Any discussion? JD?
I do not feel that sending them away empty-handed is an appropriate response to this. This is something that helps a lot of students in a lot of different ways, and I think that if we don't give them the opportunity to continue some services and to continue continue operating at a higher level than they had in years past, there's no incentive for them to look for further funding. There's no incentive for them to be able to grow. If they come to the administration and they're denied, and they come to their last chance S&A and they're denied, there's no incentive for them to try again and again. And what kind of impact is that going to have on the program is my concern. I understand that it is the job of this committee to uphold a financial security for the programs that we support, and I feel like by drastically reducing the amount that they've requested below their Disney World, below what they actually have said they need to continue at this level, I feel it is an appropriate response to help that program grow at a rate that is not over the top, and that is not over the that is not an. Basically, what I'm trying to say is everybody needs to make cuts at this time, and it's not saying that, okay, Learning Commons, you don't got to make any cuts. You can just keep spending a whole bunch of money.
Derek?
So I'd just like to say that I think the Learning Commons is a great thing, and I support it, and I know a bunch of people who use it, and they get a lot of benefit out of it. That being said, it's academics. I'm totally opposed to S&A funding it, even what it's already funded it.
Is there any further discussion at this time? JD?
Many times we've funded trips that augmented students'
Hey,
learning.
JD, can you speak to the motion, please?
This is to the
Just try
motion.
to keep it nice and narrow.
And many times we have we've authorized requests for students to go on trips and to go on these these conferences that augmented their education in their field, that helped them understand their major and what they were going through in their education. And this is no different. Helping fund the Learning Commons to be able to do something to augment their education in a lot of these classes that are required by the university. There's lower level math.
JD, are you
classes.
speaking to the motion?
This is to the motion and to his comment, in part. So that is yes.
Okay.
Call a question.
All right. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Any opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. Motion denied. Is there another motion on the table? JD?
Let me pull my calculator out real quick here.
Is there any further discussion at this time, just regarding this? JD?
I make a motion to approve the Learning Commons for amount of $22,531.25, which is in the middle of not funding it for anything and halfway.
Can you repeat that number?
$22,531.25 to come out of our supplemental funding for a one-year pay. It's not a multi-year pay.
There's been a motion. Is there a second? John, second. Any discussion? All in favor of approving the Learning Commons for the amount of $22,531.25 to come out of our supplemental funding for one time? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Any opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Is that 6? Okay, so it's a tie. I know. All right, give me a minute here on this one. I'm going to vote no. Is there any further discussion at this time? Motion denied. Is there any further discussion at this time? Any other motions on the table?
comments because this is a heart-wrenching, difficult, very torn decision that folks are making. And I think it's important that the message not be that the committee does not support the learning commons from the perspective of, depending on what your feelings are, can you afford it, can you not, is it academic or is it not? I think it's important that we recognize the importance of tutoring and the learning commons, and that perhaps it would be wise to that and maybe help work to find an alternate solution then, whether it be a student fee, whether it be a fee that students opt into similar to a course fee or the printing fee, but they also help work to find an alternate solution so they aren't just left out there sitting, what do we do now? Because I do think it's important from whether it's academic or not and whether we can afford it or not to still help them find a solution.
I definitely agree with that, Sharon, and I would agree that the Learning Commons is very important. Clearly, we are a split committee on that, but maybe we can work together to draft a correspondence similar to that and work alongside the Learning Commons. Is there any further discussion or any motions at this time regarding the funding request by the Learning Commons? All right, the request dies. We'll move on to public comment second call. At this time, I would like to, I can talk, public comment. We can talk about why I voted that. Not as chair, Robert, your chair. You can sit there. I just like to, because I know it's clearly a split choice in the committee regarding that, but I was elected chair for a reason, and one of the reasons is to uphold the financial stability. And just like the administration having to dip into their reserves or into money and carry forward money, we would have to do the same. The university is stretched thin all the way across, whether it's S&A fees, state money, the Learning Commons. It's being seen in every department. It was a tough decision for me because Kelsey Miller is a great friend of mine. The BOD supported it. But as elected chair of the S&A committee, I need to uphold the financial stability of this committee, and I was doing my fiduciary duty in that. So with that, I'll regain control of the chair. Thanks, Robert. Brian Elliott.
Yeah, well, for starters, I don't speak for the United States Army in any capacity, nor the uniform, please. I'm not dressed in this right now, so don't get me in trouble, please. The reason that this vote in particular really concerns me is because, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, the committee originally recommended that the Learning Commons come back to S&A and seek base funding, right?
I would like to say that was before state legislation decided to freeze tuition. We were running on the assumption that we were going to be receiving additional funds from raising the S&A fee.
That may very well be true, but some members of your committee voted against it for academic reasons, so that would be hypocritical if that was the reason that they told them to. So I just want to point that out. But I feel like the service was especially important. I understand that the vote is already taken, but it definitely concerns me. I think this is something that you all should have funded. So, Robert?
I'll call him Robert.
My apologies.
Go ahead and take a seat.
I'm trying to run your meeting.
I just wanted to say that our vote to have the Learning Commons come back in no way shows whether or not we do or do not support the Learning Commons. It was for them to come back and make a case. So by saying that, by us inviting them back, should in no way mean that we were going to say yes or no regardless. It was just so that they could talk about the Learning Commons.
I'd like to remind the committee this is public comment, not discussion. So, Brian.
Member of the public, I'm commenting. So in regards to that, that would absolutely be true under normal circumstances, but they were waiting for an opportunity to go forward with a fee. Am I correct on that? So if they missed that window of opportunity because the committee recommended that they come back here and receive base funding, then that would kind of put them in a difficult position. And that's my concern. So
I'll work that. The fee would have to go through a referendum anyways. So it wouldn't be able to go on the ballot until May. And they're more than welcome to come talk to our elections coordinator, Miles Glover, about putting that fee on the ballot to be presented to the BFC next year. Any further public comment at this time? JD, Derek, and then...
this is not speaking to my opinion on this. I have two comments. One, I apologize to anybody on the committee member, the committee, that if you were offended by me getting heated. I wanted the voice of this place for them to be heard. And on a completely different note, unrelated to this meeting at all, the next two meetings, I just want to let everybody know I will not be in attendance. I have a forum for the BOD campaign next Wednesday, and the Wednesday after that I'll be setting up a tent on Fort Lewis, trying to run away from that guy.
I'd also like to remind committee members, if you can be present next week, please, because we are going to have 4 members absent. So, well, Sarah's not going to be there. Okay. We'd like to meet quorum, but yeah, and elections are going on for BOD, so potentially that too. Any further public comment at this time?
I just wanted to say to the committee that, just as a general statement as the advisor, that I think the discussion that you all had tonight was very important, and that you all did it in a very respectful manner, and that you, as a committee as a whole, I think we touched on all of the key points that we need to in terms of being fiscally responsible, as well as trying to protect the programs that we already support and the services that the students need. So while the outcome, some of the committee may not be happy with the outcome, and some of our campus constituents may not be, I think that you all did your due diligence in that, and just want to recognize that as a whole, it was a very good conversation and important. I'm glad that we didn't just skim over this topic, and it was necessary for us to have this discussion for 3 weeks.
I definitely agree with that. Any further comment at this time? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Is there a second? Any discussion? All in favor? Miles seconded that. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, meeting adjourned at 6:46 p.m.